when Gregory was preparing to divorce me for the sake of his junior schoolmate. He got into a car accident and fell into a coma, but his soul was trapped by my side the whole time, and I pretended not to see it. The doctors said he might never wake up again. His junior schoolmate was quick to distance herself, promptly cutting ties and officially announcing a new relationship with someone else. Later, when Gregory finally regained consciousness, she rushed back to him again, with tears shimmering in her eyes. She cried plaintively under Gregory's calm gaze. "Gregory, I waited for you for so long. You're finally awake." Chapter 1. I looked at Gregory lying unconscious in the ICU, his body covered in tubes and wires, and a bleak, uncontrollable sense of schadenfreude rose in my heart. See? This is the retribution for betraying sincere love. The doctor said his brain injury was severe, and the chance of him waking up was very small, less than 5%. When his junior schoolmate, Emma, heard the news, she came to the hospital, cast a disgusted glance at him, and coldly tossed out a single line: "I hope he recovers soon." She never came back again after that. She probably forgot that Gregory had gotten into that accident because of her. Half a year ago, the day before Gregory was supposed to divorce me, Emma casually mentioned that she wanted to eat dumplings from the old street in the south of the city, without caring about the torrential rain and violent winds. Gregory went out to buy them for her. In the end, carrying a bowl of steaming hot dumplings, he was caught in a chain reaction car crash. When I rushed to the hospital after receiving the call, what awaited me were one critical condition notice after another, each as thin as paper. No one could understand how I felt at that moment. On one hand, darkly wishing that it would be fine if he just died like this, and on the other, viciously thinking that dying this way would be far too easy for him. I didn't know what kind of outcome I wanted. I only hoped that every bit of pain I had suffered, he would experience in full as well. But now, he lay asleep in the hospital, reduced to a vegetative state, and the woman he loved most, Emma, no longer wanted him. Actually, when I once ran into Emma at a restaurant, I had kindly reminded her. The doctor said that if the person he cares about most spends more time with him and talks to him more, the chances of him waking up might be higher. She smiled non-committally. What does that have to do with me? Why should I waste the best years of my life on a vegetative patient who has nothing to do with me? Adriana, you're his wife. You're the one who should be with him. Nothing to do with her. I silently repeated those words to myself, finding them absurdly ironic. When she made Gregory abandon me while I was burning with a 40-degree fever just to celebrate her birthday, she didn't say it had nothing to do with her. When she needed Gregory to ask me for a divorce so he could be with her, she didn't say it had nothing to do with her. Yet when Gregory became a vegetative patient after getting into an accident for her sake, when he needed her companionship and care, she said it had nothing to do with her. I looked at her calmly. Emma, don't forget, he ended up like this because he went to buy that bowl of dumplings for you. At that, she flew into a rage out of embarrassment and shouted back. Did I hold a knife or a gun to his head and force him to go? He was the one who insisted on buying them for me out of his own one-sided devotion. He just had bad luck and got into an accident, ending up half dead as a vegetative patient. Don't even think about pinning this on me. I said nothing more, only quietly watched her hurriedly leave, as if fleeing from bad luck itself. She was right. Waiting for someone who might never wake up again, of course Emma wouldn't be willing to do that. I tilted my head slightly, my gaze seemingly casual as it swept past the soul that had followed me for so long. Disbelief filled his eyes, his brows tightly furrowed. Right now, he must be suffering terribly. Chapter 2. Gregory didn't know that I could see him. It was the second week after the car accident. I had accidentally fallen asleep while handling work in the study. A night breeze blew in through the window I'd forgotten to close, startling me awake. Through my hazy vision, I saw Gregory leaning lazily against the wooden bookshelf filled with books. White gauze curtains brushed lightly across his body from time to time. All my drowsiness vanished instantly. I even forgot to react. After staying half asleep, half awake with my head resting on the desk for a long while, I picked up the phone and called the hospital. The response I got was, "Mr. Koo is stable today. His condition hasn't worsened, but there are still no signs of him waking up." After calmly hanging up, I blinked, and only then did I realize that his entire body was faintly translucent. So I stood up, stepped onto the soft carpet, and slowly walked toward him, pretending that I saw nothing at all. I reached straight through his body and took down a copy of song lyrics of the Song Dynasty from the second shelf. In the few short steps it took me to turn around and walk back to my chair with the book in hand, my emotions underwent a drastic shift, from fear to shock, and finally to calm. Gregory's soul had left his body and was trapped by my side. Not only that, I could hear him speak, because when I picked up the divorce agreement he had already had his lawyer draft. I heard him scoff. "Adriana, you must be very happy now, right? I'm unconscious and can't divorce you anymore. This really turned out exactly the way you wanted. Exactly the way I wanted." He thought that my refusal to let go, my insistence until he agreed to divorce, was because I was unwilling and unable to give up. But the truth was, I had genuinely planned to let him go. Happy? No. And I wanted him to be unhappy too. So I let him hear with his own ears how Emma had distanced herself from him. Soft footsteps echoed faintly from the end of the corridor. I walked silently into the ICU and stopped beside his bed. I had to admit, even dressed in a hospital gown, his hair limp and messy, his face pale with illness as he lay unconscious on the bed, Gregory was still very handsome. His thick, curled eyelashes cast faint shadows beneath his eyes. Below his high, straight nose were lips of just the right thinness. The smooth lines of his face had become even more sharply defined due to the coma, making his features appear deeper and more striking. But I had never liked Gregory, or chosen to be with him, because of his looks. After all, I understood the truth that the more beautiful something is, the more dangerous it tends to be. That was why, when we first met at the same wedding, him as a groomsman and me as a bridesmaid, I had already categorized him as a dangerous object. Aside from politely handing him a tissue after he was splashed with alcohol, I had very little interaction with him. But when fate decides to entangle you, there's no stopping it. Soon enough, we met again. That evening, while I was jogging in the park, I coincidentally rescued an elderly man who had fainted. She turned out to be Gregory's grandmother. Starting from the dinner Gregory invited me to as a thank you, the frequency of our meetings steadily increased. When I was trapped in my internship building by the rain, I would just happen to run into Gregory passing by, and he would conveniently give me a ride home. During a holiday, I was dragged by a friend to an event, only to find out it was Gregory's birthday party. Facing the lit candles, he made a wish for peace and safety year after year. Too many coincidences made me realize something was off, so I began deliberately avoiding him. But Gregory not only paid no attention to my distancing, he pressed forward step by step. When I had nowhere left to retreat and asked him in panic what exactly he wanted, he finally smiled, his eyes full of warmth, and asked gently, "Adriana, I'm courting you. Can't you feel it?" Chapter 3. I didn't know why Gregory liked me, but from that point on, he stopped hiding it and launched a fierce, straightforward pursuit. I resisted his closeness and tried my best to guard my heart. But the Gregory back then was handsome and mature, witty and humorous, successful in his career, and, most dangerously of all, the kind of man who was gentle and attentive to you alone. To be honest, for someone like me, who had just graduated from university and stepped into society, remaining completely unmoved was almost impossible. Falling for him was only a matter of time. The turning point came on Valentine's Day. That night, in order to close a deal, I drank far too much. The other party still wouldn't let it go, holding his wine glass and pressing it frivolously against my chest as he smiled and said, "Youth really is an advantage." Huh? Miss Jiang, do you have a boyfriend? I was suppressing my nausea and hadn't even had time to react when the private room door was shoved open with great force. Gregory walked in, his face dark with anger. He grabbed the man's wrist, snapped the glass in his hand, and said coldly, "She does now." It wasn't until Gregory pulled me out onto the street that I belatedly processed what he had just said. My thoughts spun around before I finally asked, "Inside, someone will handle it. Don't worry." I nodded. I could more or less guess that one of my colleagues, seeing that Gregory's status was anything but ordinary, had been bribed and tipped him off. Under the flickering lights of the romantic night, Gregory took off his coat and draped it over my shoulders, not mentioning the unpleasant incident again. Things like this were actually quite common in the workplace. When you don't have the power to resist, all you can do is swallow your grievances. At worst, you go home and cry it out. Besides, being wronged was something I'd already grown used to. But Gregory stood in front of me in an absolutely domineering way, letting me experience, perhaps for the first time, what it felt like to be protected. When people are at their weakest, what they fear most is comfort. Couples passed by on the roadside. My silence was broken as Gregory spoke in a casual tone, as if he were simply asking whether I wanted to grab a meal together. Adriana, he asked, do you want to spend Valentine's Day with me? Even now, I can still recall the trembling sensation of that tiny sprout breaking through the soil in my heart. I looked into his serious eyes and followed my own feelings to a decision. It would be him. So I pointed to a small cart selling roses by the roadside. Then, could I have one rose? He froze for a second, then suddenly smiled. Turning around, he bought the entire cart of roses and came back to tell me, now, they're all yours. And in the future, there will always be roses. I was too foolish and naive back then. I thought that in the future meant forever, until Emma returned from abroad. Only then did I realize that the expiration date of that future was the moment she reappeared. After Emma showed up, every promise and vow turned into a joke. I had seen countless online discussions about how lethal a first love can be, but no amount of detailed answers could compare to the single look Gregory gave Emma. It was a painfully cliché story. Emma was Gregory's unattainable first love, the one he could never let go of. After she chose another man and went abroad, Gregory had never truly stopped thinking about her, and I was nothing more than cannon fodder on his life's path. Gregory had only one close family member, his grandmother, back when she collapsed. It was because of stomach cancer. The only thing she couldn't let go of in this life was Gregory, so she wished to see him settled down, and I was merely the tool Gregory chose to put her mind at ease. Chapter 4. But Gregory's grandmother genuinely liked me and treated me very well. The love I felt from Gregory had been an illusion, yet the familial affection his grandmother gave me was real. She would make my favorite osmanthus cakes for me, prepare clothes for all 4 seasons in advance, and whenever Gregory and I had an argument, she would side with me without hesitation, raising her cane to strike him as she scolded. What could Adriana possibly have done wrong? If there's any fault at all, it's yours, you little bastard. Even before she passed away, she was still telling me, marrying this little bastard has really wronged you. Adriana, as long as the two of you live well together, I can finally rest at ease. That day, Gregory's eyes were red as he tightly held my hand and promised, we definitely will. And then, 8 months after his grandmother's death, he reunited with Emma, who had broken up and returned to the country, at a gathering. I first sensed something was wrong over a very trivial matter. One evening while we were having dinner together, I mentioned to him that a sudden rainstorm had fallen during the day, and afterward, double rainbows appeared in the sky. Everyone on social media was posting photos they had taken. It was said that when double rainbows appeared, it signified joyful events arriving at one's door. After saying that, I asked him if he had seen them. He didn't answer, because his mind was elsewhere. A few seconds later, he noticed that I had put down my chopsticks and was quietly looking at him. He smiled gently and asked, Adriana, what did you just say? I said it was nothing important. Back when I was studying, whenever I encountered multiple choice questions I didn't know how to answer, I could rely on intuition to guess the correct one with remarkable accuracy. I never imagined that one day, this skill I had once been proud of would be used on Gregory, almost uncontrollably. I guessed that during those few seconds when Gregory was distracted, it was because of another woman, and I wasn't wrong. It was Emma. She was Gregory's junior by 3 years. Back then, Gregory wasn't yet as successful as he later became, relying solely on his looks. He simply couldn't compete with the rival who also liked Emma, handsome, wealthy, and accomplished. So, without a doubt, he lost. But he probably never expected that one day Emma would break up and return to the country, and that by then, he himself would already be successful in his career. It seemed as if everything had aligned perfectly, as though their past separation had only been so they could reunite again at the best possible time. I don't know just how deeply Gregory loved Emma, for her to be able to summon him away from my side again and again, without the slightest concern that he was already a married man, with just a light, casual statement that she wanted to be with Gregory. She was able to destroy my marriage, destroy me, from initial suspicion, to confrontation, and finally to pleading and hysterics. Gregory shoved me away in disgust and said, Adriana, The way you are now is really disgusting. That night, I stood on the balcony all night long. My tears were dried by the wind over and over again, until I finally understood one thing. Gregory was right. I, too, found this version of myself disgusting, so I gave up completely. When Gregory brought up divorce yet again, I asked him, in these 4 years together, was there ever a single moment when you were sincere with me? He impatiently avoided my gaze and said no. I lowered my head, stayed silent for a few seconds, then calmly agreed to the divorce. He seemed a little surprised and looked at me warily. What trick are you playing this time? After all, several times before, I had used excuses like suddenly falling ill or my car breaking down midway to keep postponing it. The only time I truly wanted to divorce him sincerely, he ended up in a car accident for Emma's sake and fell into a coma. And then it turned out that Emma not only abandoned him decisively, but even turned around and got back together with her ex. Chapter 5. I heard that the reason Emma broke up and returned to the country back then was because her rich heir boyfriend had been entangled with his first love. After repeated arguments over it, the two finally fell out. Men's worst instincts lie in obsessing over what they can't have, and regretting only after they've lost it. So when Emma returned home and reconnected with Gregory, appearing in the same circles again and again, drawing closer step by step, the rich heir also came back to chase her. It was hard to say whether, during her time with Gregory, there wasn't even a small part of Emma doing it deliberately to provoke that rich heir. After all, Gregory had once been his greatest rival, and during the period when Gregory was determined to divorce me for Emma, it was also when the rich heir's attempts at winning her back were at their most frantic. He did many things that were both romantic and extreme. Drone-written apologies, seas of flowers, ring proposals, self-harm after drinking. Emma watched all of it quietly, continued staying with Gregory, and then, not long after Gregory fell into a coma from the car accident, agreed to reconcile when the rich heir once again spent a fortune on massive public screens to apologize and confess his love. No one knew exactly what role Gregory had played between the two of them, but the rich heir did come to the hospital once to visit Gregory, and said with unmistakable relief, although it might be wrong to think this way, I'm really grateful for that car accident that night. Gregory, this time, I won again. Gregory was standing right behind him at the time, his face dark as he stared at him, but in his ghostly state, there was nothing he could do. From the moment he heard Emma cut ties with him, to personally witnessing her turn back and reconcile, Gregory was first incredulous, then furious, and finally forced to resign himself to accepting everything. I calmly, almost pleasantly, watched him suffer through every stage of pain, watching him begin to follow quietly behind me. I found it deeply ironic. He had once wanted so desperately to sever all ties with me, to never see me again, and yet, in the end, he was forced to be with me every single day. Just like when we had first fallen in love, we shared everything about our daily lives without reservation, keeping each other informed of every move. Now, he had to follow me to work, to gatherings, to shopping trips, and even listen as I planned where to travel next. As time passed, I began to hear his resentful, indignant voice more and more often. I'm lying here unconscious, and you still have the mood to go traveling? Do you even have a heart? Do you not care at all whether I live or die? Adriana, have I been lying there too long that you've forgotten you're already married? Stay away from that man. The man he was referring to was an intern I was mentoring, named Duncan. Among all the interns I had guided, he was the only one who didn't call me Adriana, sister, but instead addressed me directly and formally as Adriana Law. He was also the most outstanding in ability among them all. I didn't actually care how they addressed me. Besides, Duncan's voice was low and clear, and when he said Adriana Law, it didn't feel disrespectful at all. But Gregory didn't see it that way. As long as Duncan appeared by my side, Gregory would reveal a side of himself I had never seen before, shouting in exasperation, Adriana, are you blind? Can't you see his intentions aren't pure? Hearing that, I would lift my head and look at Duncan, clean-cut, bright, polite, obedient, every shirt button fastened with meticulous care, and feel utterly puzzled. Gregory, what are you panicking about? Of course, I was no longer a naive young girl, nor was I blind. There was no way I couldn't see what Duncan was thinking. He liked me. Duncan had the kind of sunny, puppy-like looks that girls these days adored. But his personality was a stark contrast, calm, restrained, rational, and with a strong sense of boundaries. Ever since I'd known him, I had almost never seen him lose emotional control. Even when a colleague accidentally deleted data he had painstakingly worked on, he could still finish his breakfast unhurriedly, then calmly choose the fastest way to recover it, or simply redo it from scratch. Chapter 6. After resolving the issue, he turned to the colleague who was full of apologies and worry and said, "It's already fine, just be more careful next time." The only time I ever saw panic on his face was during a business meeting we attended together. After it ended, he went to get the car, while I rested for a bit in the private room before going to find him. On the way, I ran into a drunk man who dragged me into another room, taking advantage of the alcohol to assault me with ill intent. To be honest, if this had happened back when I had just graduated, I would have been scared stiff, struggling desperately and screaming for help. But I wasn't that girl anymore, so I waited for the right moment. And the instant he touched me, I grabbed a wine bottle nearby and smashed it hard over his head. Then I called the manager, contacted the police, pulled the surveillance footage, and had everything verified. When Duncan found me, his usually immaculate shirt was dust-stained for once, though he hadn't even noticed. He only stared at my hand, which had been cut by glass shards and was bleeding, his breathing uneven as he apologized to me. "I'm sorry, I came too late." I smiled faintly at him. "You weren't late. You came just in time." Later, after he bought medicine and finished bandaging my wound, while he was driving me home, I looked out the window and spoke in a relaxed tone. "Duncan, I'm already married." He showed no surprise at all, keeping his eyes on the road as he replied casually, I know, but I heard you're getting divorced." Those two lines were the only time since we'd known each other that we talked about personal matters. Everything said was factual, and there was nothing improper or over the line. So Gregory's anger baffled me. I had clearly done nothing wrong, and he clearly didn't love me, so why was he angry? But it didn't matter. None of his emotions, nor he himself, would affect me anymore. I continued maintaining a normal colleague relationship with Duncan, until today, during a company team-building hike. When I accidentally slipped on a stepped slope, Duncan reacted instantly, grabbing me and pulling me into his arms as the two of us rolled down together. I was fine, only a slight scrape on my cheek. But Duncan, in order to protect me, suffered varying degrees of bruising on his arm and lower leg. I followed the ambulance to the hospital, my heart hanging in my throat until his examination results finally came back. Just as I heard the doctor say that he was fine and only needed to rest at home, I received a call from Gregory's attending physician. It was also at that moment that I suddenly realized. When Duncan and I rolled down together, Gregory, who had always followed behind me, shouting Adriana in panic urgency, was gone. At the same time, the doctor's voice came through the phone. "When we just examined Mr. Koo, we found that his condition is improving. There are signs that he may wake up." I stood there for a while holding the disconnected phone, then went to the ICU and stood in front of Gregory, who was still lying there with his eyes closed. I let out a mocking smile. "Less than a 5% chance, and you can still wake up." Chapter 7. Whether Gregory would wake up or not. I didn't know, but half a month after I left the hospital that day, I heard another piece of news. Emma had broken up again. A long time ago. I once saw a saying online, cheating only happens 0 times, or countless times. So the fact that her rich heir boyfriend, not long after reconciling with her, got entangled with some unknown small-time influencer and wanted to break up again was hardly surprising. What truly surprised me was that Emma completely abandoned her former image, the aloof, untouchable goddess who could leave at any time. In a vast shopping mall, she cursed loudly while begging humbly, utterly unconcerned about her dignity or image. Watching that scene from afar, I felt an overwhelming sense of familiarity. That was who I used to be. Back then, when I clung desperately to Gregory and refused to let go, I was exactly like that, like a mentally unstable lunatic. The incident that left the deepest impression on me was 1 year on my birthday. That day, I ran into Gregory, who had said he was going on a business trip, sitting in a cafe, chatting happily with Emma. In that instant, it felt as if a bucket of ice water had been poured over me from head to toe, while at the same time my heart was being roasted over blazing fire. the pain unbearable. Without thinking of the consequences, I rushed over and swept everything off the table in front of them. Gregory stood up immediately and shouted at me in anger. Adriana, are you crazy? Emma smiled elegantly and looked at Gregory. How could you marry a woman like this, Gregory? My rationality completely collapsed. I raised my hand and slapped her across the face. Then should you marry a home-wrecking mistress like yourself instead? And Gregory, without the slightest hesitation, raised his hand and slapped me. A metallic, bloody sweetness instantly spread across my mouth. That night, for the first time, he said to me, Adriana, let's get divorced. I had truly, deeply loved Gregory, so even though reason told me I should let go, emotionally I was unwilling, reluctant, and unwilling to let them have their happiness. In the end, I left myself covered in wounds. And now, Emma was finally tasting the pain I had once endured. As for why she could leave so cleanly after her last breakup, yet chose the complete opposite this time, I couldn't help but suspect that it was because her fallback, her confidence, her tool for provoking the rich heir, Gregory, was lying unconscious. The farce was still unfolding. As I stirred my coffee and prepared to withdraw my gaze, I inadvertently caught sight of a faint, insubstantial figure standing at the corner of the crowd, calmly watching Emma's hysterics. It was Gregory. After many days, his soul had appeared again, only this time, he was no longer trapped by my side, yet he also could no longer come close to me. A distance of 3 meters. That was the closest he could get to me. I thought that once he gained his freedom, he wouldn't follow me anymore. Yet to my surprise, every morning when I left for work afterward, I could see him standing quietly beneath a ginkgo tree near the entrance of my residential complex. The moment he saw me, he would instinctively walk toward me, only to be yanked back to his original spot by some unseen force. Every time he walked toward me, every time he was dragged back. I don't know whether a wandering, lonely soul like him, drifting through this world, might also long for someone, anyone, to be able to see him. But one evening, as I stepped out of a dessert shop, I curved my lips into a smile and looked in his direction. After a brief moment of surprise, he seemed to grow excited, his lips moving slightly. Judging by the shape of his mouth, he was probably calling my name, Adriana. Then, carrying a delicately packaged little cake, I walked forward step by step, watching as he was forced to retreat step by step, until I stopped at the spot where he had been standing, and he saw Duncan walk toward me, straight through his body. Chapter 8. Ever since that accident, Duncan had been recuperating at home. During that time, I went to visit him once, bringing flowers and fruit, and I covered all of his medical expenses as well as the cost of hiring a caregiver. He didn't refuse. He only looked me in the eyes when I asked if he needed anything else and said, 1 month from now, it's my birthday. Now he had fully recovered, and it happened to be his birthday. Carrying a cake, I went exactly as promised. To spend his birthday with him, Duncan led me toward the parking area. Gregory seemed to realize what we were about to do. Across the bustling crowd, he shouted at me at the top of his lungs, Adriana, you're not allowed to go. Come back. Adriana, come back. Without the slightest hesitation, I got into the car, looking at Gregory's furious, almost unhinged expression in the rearview mirror. I felt a little dazed and suddenly remembered something trivial. Not long after I started dating Gregory, I changed jobs and moved to another company. One evening, I had to work overtime, so I told Gregory he didn't need to pick me up. After work, a colleague offered to give me a ride on the way. Just as I got into the car, Gregory called. Through the phone, his voice carried a faint smile, helpless yet indulgent. Classmate Adriana, I've been waiting downstairs for 3 hours. Are you really just going to leave me like this? Still startled, I saw Gregory's figure in the rearview mirror. I immediately got out of the car, ran toward him, threw myself into his arms, and asked, why didn't you call me? Why wait here by yourself? He affectionately ruffled my hair and said with a smile, of course I didn't dare interrupt my dear girlfriend at work. My thoughts snapped back to the present. Gregory's vague silhouette in the rearview mirror grew smaller and smaller until it turned into a black dot. I heard Duncan ask me, what are you looking at? I answered half-jokingly, a farce. 15 minutes later, We arrived at the restaurant we had reserved. Although it was his birthday, Duncan ordered everything according to my taste. Without drawing attention, I shifted my gaze to the cake, opened the packaging, and a light, sweet orange fragrance immediately drifted out. After lighting the candles, I picked up the cake and congratulated him with a smile. Happy birthday, Duncan. Make a wish. The restaurant's lighting was soft and dim. Through the flickering candlelight, I couldn't see his features clearly, but I knew he was looking at me intently. Then he closed his eyes and made his wish. I hope I won't be late again. I couldn't help laughing. I set the cake down, raised my glass to him, and said, "Then I wish your wish comes true." Later, slightly drunk, we strolled along the riverside. The river reflected the dazzling lights. I watched quietly for a while, then sighed and, for the second time, talked about something personal with Duncan. I was very straightforward with him. Duncan, although I'm getting divorced, you also know that he was in a car accident and is still in a coma. The night breeze gently stirred the loose strands of hair on his forehead. He paid no attention to the implication of my words, casually resting his forearm on the railing by the riverbank. He tilted his head to look at me and said bluntly, "Divorce or widowhood, one way or another, there will be a result." At the very moment his words fell, I was startled to notice Gregory's figure not far away. I didn't know whether the evening wind had carried those words to his ears. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him looking at me in silence. Then, as if mocking himself, he let out a soft chuckle, and his figure slowly dissolved into the wind. 3 days later, I got that result. Gregory woke up. Chapter 9. Emma arrived at the hospital earlier than I did. In the silent, icy hospital room, she was crying under Gregory's calm gaze. Her eyes filled with tears as they fell. "I've waited for you for so long. Gregory, you're finally awake." I didn't know how she found out that Gregory had woken up, nor was I interested in her sincere, aggrieved sobbing. My gaze swept past Gregory's eyes, which had been fixed on me ever since I appeared. I turned to the doctor standing nearby and asked, "When can he be discharged?" The doctor explained cautiously, "Mr. Koo has just woken up. He needs to stay in the hospital for a while longer for observation and rehabilitation training. If there's something urgent." I smiled politely. "There's nothing urgent. I just need to go get a divorce." The moment I finished speaking, I heard a sharp crack. Gregory knocked the water cup out of Emma's hand. Under her incredulous gaze, he stared at me intently, his eyes bloodshot, as if furious beyond control. "Adriana, I just woke up, and you don't even ask me how I am. You're already this impatient to divorce me?" See, this is what men do best, turning black into white, twisting the truth. It was clearly him who had used every possible means to force me into a divorce. Yet now he was blaming me for wanting one. Before I could speak, I heard Emma call out softly, her trembling voice filled with confusion, "Gregory?" The ward fell into silence. I calmly glanced at the shattered glass on the floor, ignored Gregory's furious stare, and turned to leave without hesitation, only throwing out a single sentence, "Notify me when you're discharged so we can get divorced." After that, I never went back to the hospital even once. I did hear that Emma went there every day. As for what she did there, I didn't know, and didn't care. The troublesome part was that every 2 or 3 days, I would receive a call from the hospital. Nothing more than updates on Gregory's recovery. I wasn't sure whether these things truly needed to be reported to a family member, but I didn't want to know. So when they called again, I declined tactfully. "He's an adult. There's no need to report every detail to me. Next time, unless he's dead, don't call me again." In the second before the call disconnected, I heard the sound of glass smashing onto the floor, followed by Emma's cry of alarm. I saw Gregory again 2 months later. One evening, he had been discharged. Because my car had been sent for cleaning, Duncan, who had been working overtime with me, drove me downstairs to my apartment complex. I had just watched his car drive away when I heard an angry voice behind me. "Adriana." The smile at the corner of my lips froze as I turned around. It was Gregory. His face was pale, his frame much thinner. His light shirt billowed in the night breeze, and the streetlight stretched his shadow long across the ground. I stayed where I was, watching him stride toward me, then coldly question me. "It's so late. Where did you two come from?" I couldn't be bothered to respond. Frowning, I sidestepped him. If this isn't about the divorce, I don't think we have anything to talk about. After only 2 steps, he blocked my way. The veins at his temples bulged as he ground out each word through clenched teeth. Adriana, don't forget, we're not divorced yet. I understood his meaning almost instantly. It felt absurdly ironic. I couldn't help letting out a soft laugh, then looked up at him gently and asked, Gregory, that marriage certificate never managed to restrain you in the past. Do you really think it can restrain me now? Chapter 10. Emma came to find me a month after Gregory was discharged from the hospital. Ever since Gregory woke up from his coma, his attitude toward Emma had done a complete 180-degree turn, so obvious that even the nurses at the hospital could sense his coldness toward her. After being discharged, Gregory used the clumsy excuse of needing to handle work to refuse meeting her. Instead, he showed up every day downstairs at my company building and outside my residential complex, because he no longer wanted a divorce. So the first thing Emma said after she found me was, Adriana, you did it on purpose, didn't you? You deliberately kept things ambiguous with another man, just to provoke Gregory, to make him come back and try to win you over. I had just walked out of a restaurant when she said that. Amused, I held my coffee in one hand and brushed my slightly curled long hair back over my shoulder with the other. Lowering my gaze to her, I replied calmly, yes, that's right, exactly what you think. Adriana, you. I had no interest in listening to her baseless accusations. Clicking my heels, I walked around her and entered the company lobby. When I turned back, I saw her still unwilling to give up, trying to follow me inside, only to be stopped by security. Facing the guard's hesitant question, Director Jiang, she is. I smiled and said, an irrelevant person. After that, I never saw Emma again. I did, however, hear that after Gregory repeatedly ignored her, Emma finally lost her patience and, with indifference in her voice, told him coldly, Gregory, you'd better not regret this. I won't give you another chance. Not long after, she got together with a vice president at her company who had always been quite fond of her. Clearly, the harsh words Emma left behind had no effect on Gregory whatsoever, because he continued, as always, to find excuses to see me and stubbornly insist, Adriana, I won't get divorced. I found it both ironic and ridiculous. Back when he was doing everything he could to force me into a divorce, he probably never imagined that one day our roles would be reversed, and that he would be the one saying those words. I even heard him speak to me again in a soft, gentle voice I hadn't heard in a long time. Adriana, can we start over? Start over. He wanted me to pretend that Emma had never appeared, that he had never hurt me, that none of it had ever happened, and then, without any resentment, go back to being with him, loving him like before. I felt a bit helpless, and more than that, confused. In the end, I only gave him one sentence in return. How did I ever marry someone like you, Gregory? That sentence seemed to hit a nerve. He immediately flew into a rage and shouted, then who do you want to marry instead? That in turn? After saying that, he asked me again, Adriana, have you made enough of a fuss yet? Right. When he wanted a divorce, it was for true love. When I wanted a divorce, it was me being unreasonable and making trouble. In fact, ever since I gave up on him completely, I hadn't been angry in a long time. My career was going well. My friends were by my side. My life was comfortable. There seemed to be nothing left worth getting angry over. Until this moment, my emotions were stirred up again, and words were no longer enough to vent my anger. So I raised my hand without hesitation and slapped him hard across the face. A sharp smack rang out, followed by dead silence. Gregory's face was knocked to the side. He stayed in that position for a long moment, then pressed his tongue against his cheek and let out a scoffing laugh. I've paid back the slap I owed you. Satisfied now? I know you let him get close to you just to get back at me. Adriana, you've achieved your goal. Chapter 11. I don't deny it, I did feel a stir of attraction toward Duncan. The reason was simple. Once, because of a particularly difficult project, I had been troubled for a long time. That evening, I sat alone on a bench in the plaza, lost in thought. Laughter and playful noise filled the air around me. Colorful balloons and bubbles drifted back and forth, but none of it had anything to do with me. It was in that very scene that a teddy bear mascot, holding a balloon, made its way through the crowd and stopped in front of me, tying the balloon around my wrist. Then it danced a bunny dance for me. To be honest, the moves weren't very precise, but I was still amused. I leaned back slightly, looked at him, and teased. Wearing a teddy bear costume and dancing the bunny dance, Duncan, you really outdid yourself. He stepped closer, took off the mascot head, and revealed a handsome face flushed slightly red. His temples were damp with sweat, yet his eyes were clear and bright, fixed steadily on me as he said, "What you wear doesn't matter. What you dance doesn't matter either. What matters is that." Adriana, you smiled. Yes, I smiled. So the reason was really that simple. He made me happy. Later, I narrowed my eyes and studied him carefully for a moment before asking, "The teddy bear who showed up in front of me last time, that was you too, wasn't it?" It had been the night Gregory and I had our first argument over Emma. I was sitting by the glass wall in a cafe, feeling dejected, when a teddy bear walked up to me and, through the glass, performed a magic trick. At that time, Duncan hadn't joined the company yet. I didn't know who was under the mascot head. I only remembered that after I wrote "thank you" on a napkin with my lipstick. He looked at me quietly for a few seconds, then slowly turned and disappeared into the crowd. Not long after that, I heard his self-introduction in front of the interns at the company. "Hello, my name is Duncan." Different from the previous time. This time, after dancing, Duncan took off the mascot head and stood in front of me. After looking at me for a while, he asked in a low voice, "Do you remember me?" I tugged lightly at the balloon tied to my wrist and blinked. Of course I remember you. Compared to the emotions Gregory gave me, like strong liquor, Duncan's feelings were more like a cup of warm plain water. Not thrilling, not intoxicating, calm and gentle. And just because I had gone through a failed relationship didn't mean I had to swear off love entirely. That would only make Gregory and those short 4 years seem far too important in the context of my long life. So I didn't resist my feelings for Duncan. After all, love itself is never wrong. The one at fault is the person. And Gregory was nothing more than a mistake I encountered along my life's path. Once let go, he was let go. Everything that followed had nothing to do with him anymore. I certainly wouldn't use a sincere relationship to take revenge on him. So when faced with Gregory's self-assured questioning, I only shook my head lightly and looked at him with mockery. "You think far too highly of yourself, Gregory." His face went noticeably paler the instant I finished speaking. He parted his lips, his voice faintly trembling. "Hoarse as well, Adriana. I know everything before was my fault. I was blinded by obsession and ended up hurting you. But now I know I was wrong. I finally understand that the person I truly love is you. So I won't get divorced." Facing his stubborn obsession, I smiled faintly, unconcerned. "If that's the case, then Gregory, you can have a taste of it yourself, what it feels like when the person you love thinks of another man day and night." The knife he had once driven into me with his own hands had, in the end, stabbed straight back into himself. Chapter 12. Gregory said that the person he truly loved was me. To be honest, when I heard those words, I felt nothing at all. If anything, I almost wanted to laugh. If it took me being deeply hurt to such an extent for him to finally figure out who he truly loved, then that kind of love was an insult to me. What's more, it was built on the premise that Emma had deceived him and abandoned him, which then triggered his regret. Only under those circumstances did he come to this so-called realization. After that, Gregory continued to pester me for a long time. I didn't deliberately avoid him, nor did I angrily tell him to get lost. Late at night beneath my company building, at the entrance of my residential complex in the rain, if he wanted to stand there, he could stand. If he wanted to wait, he could wait. After all, aside from this kind of shameless clinging, there was no other way for him to intrude into my life anymore, even though we were still legally married. When he came to find me yet again, he asked me this question, "Adriana, you didn't actually love me that much either, did you?" I didn't know what kind of mindset he had when he said that. I lifted my head and studied his features carefully before asking him, "Gregory, do you still remember the summer of our second year of marriage?" That summer evening, filled with the endless buzzing of cicadas, we were eating barbecue at an outdoor restaurant when we ran into a group of people who had gotten drunk and were causing trouble. In the chaos, I stepped in front of Gregory and took the blow of a broken beer bottle thrust toward us. My light gauze dress tore instantly, and the blood flowing from the wound at my waist soaked a large patch of Gregory's white shirt red. When I woke up in the hospital room, the first thing I saw was Gregory sitting by my bed, disheveled, his eyes red, gripping my hand as he spoke hoarsely. "Adriana, don't do this, okay? I really can't bear the thought of you getting hurt." At the time, I gave him a weak smile and said, "Don't worry, it doesn't really hurt. It really didn't hurt that much, at least. Compared to the wounds he inflicted on me later, it was nothing." The memories unfolded in silence. Neither of us spoke. All I could hear was his slightly trembling breathing. In the end, I let out a helpless sigh. "Gregory, 4 years ago, no one could compare to you in my heart." After a long while, he seemed to speak with some difficulty, his voice hoarse and dry. "And now, in your heart, I can't compare to him anymore, can I?" I looked at him seriously and shook my head. "No, Gregory, you're not in my heart anymore." Perhaps realizing he had truly reached a dead end, he gave a bleak smile and began to play the family card. "But Adriana, you promised Grandma that you would be good to me and stay together with me." Wearily, I remained silent and said nothing. I only took out my phone and showed him a photo. Inside it was a letter Grandma had left for me. Its meaning was simple: if Gregory ever treated me poorly, I didn't need to have any scruples. I should leave him and never look back. I once thought this letter would never be needed. I didn't expect it to be used twice. The first time, I failed to heed the advice in time and struggled for a long while. The second time was this very moment. At some point, a light rain had begun to fall outside the window. The gloomy dusk pressed down heavily. The veins at Gregory's temple bulged slightly. In the end, he didn't say another word. He simply turned and left. His steps were hurried, his back utterly forlorn. Chapter 13. A long time ago, I once imagined that when Gregory finally forced me into a divorce, I would look at him, polished and radiant with pain and hatred, and say, "Gregory, I will never forgive you for the rest of my life." But now that the day had truly come, my emotions were unexpectedly calm. When we met at the Civil Affairs Bureau, Gregory looked even more haggard than before. I heard that after that day of standing in the pouring rain, he went home with a high fever that wouldn't subside and was taken to the hospital by ambulance. It seemed that the car accident really had taken a heavy toll on his body. When a friend told me over the phone, she couldn't suppress her laughter. The after effects of the car accident are showing up. Who knows how long he'll live? Cheating during marriage and betraying genuine love, this is exactly what he deserves. I hired the best divorce lawyer and submitted all the evidence of Gregory's infidelity. So when it came to dividing the assets, I didn't give up a single bit of what rightfully belonged to me. Throughout the entire process, Gregory remained silent. It wasn't until we were about to part ways that he suddenly spoke, sounding as if he were asking me, yet also talking to himself. "If Emma hadn't come back then, we could have spent our whole lives together, right? If Emma hadn't returned, his deception toward me might never have been exposed, but his longing for the unattainable white moonlight would also have lingered forever. The longer time passed, the more perfect that white moonlight would become in his heart. One day, inevitably, because of some minor conflict between us, he would begin to constantly recall Emma, and I would, in the process of being silently compared, become the one he grew to resent." I lifted my head and glanced at the cloudless sky, smiling faintly. "Gregory, I was never meant to be dragged into this vortex of 3 people entangled. It was you, out of sheer self-interest, who pulled me into it with your own hands." Life after the divorce didn't change much. I went to work as usual, socialized, and occasionally took a few days off to travel after finishing a project. Except for one thing, Duncan and I became a couple. It happened 3 months after my divorce. At a friend's birthday party, I stepped out onto the terrace for some fresh air. A business partner from one of my projects walked over and handed me a glass of wine, asking politely and like a gentleman, "That old film we talked about during our collaboration, I recently found the original soundtrack CD. I was wondering if director Jiang might be interested." We were all adults. The implication was obvious. My eyes curved slightly as I smiled and was about to speak, when a voice suddenly sounded behind him. "Sorry, I was in line first." It was Duncan. He was dressed in a clean, refreshing black and white sports outfit. His jet black short hair made his features look sharp yet faintly carefree. He stood there quietly, his gaze fixed steadily on me. The night breeze carried a hint of some unknown floral scent. I broke the silence first, casually glancing at the wine glass in the partner's hand before speaking directly. Sorry. I drink warm plain water. The rejection was subtle but clear. Soon enough, only Duncan and I were left on the terrace. I stood there quietly without moving, watching as he took off his jacket and draped it over my off-shoulder dress. Then I tilted my face up slightly and asked him with an unhurried smile. So, Duncan, what movie are we going to see? He lowered his head to look at me as well, his eyes shining brightly, his tone unusually serious. To see I Love You. Chapter 14. There were no earth-shattering or unforgettable scenes between Duncan and me. Yet whenever I thought about us, everything felt quietly beautiful and warm. The warm milk he brought me in the mornings, the hair tie of mine he always carried with him, the pair of flats kept in his car, the way he would subtly adjust my diet a week before my period. Sometimes, watching him carefully blow dry my hair in the mirror, I would involuntarily recall the first piece of evidence that made me realize his feelings. It was probably in the same elevator, with him standing behind me, his gaze lingering on my reflection in the mirror, a look that was not entirely innocent. Duncan was mentally mature, clear-headed, independent, capable. In our relationship, his effort was visibly greater than mine, while I seemed able to offer nothing more than companionship. Occasionally, I would ask him whether he felt it was unfair. He would calmly shake his head, hold me, and sigh, his voice carrying an inexplicable sense of grievance. I just feel like you could walk away at any time. To be honest, I had been betrayed in love before, so even though I had feelings for him, I still left myself a way out, never giving my whole heart. After a moment of silence, all I could say was, "It's my fault that you can't feel 100% of my love. I'm sorry." Hearing that, he seemed relieved and smiled, his tone unusually serious. "Then I'll love you a little more, and make our love complete." I didn't know how far Duncan and I would go, but as long as being together made me comfortable and happy, I would live each day well. If it works, we stay together. If it doesn't, we part ways. As long as I'm at ease. That was the lesson I learned from my failed relationship with Gregory. I saw Gregory again in the second year after our divorce, at a welcome-back dinner for a friend who had returned from abroad. I was on my way back to the private room from the restroom when I was blocked at one end of the corridor. A crowd had gathered to watch a scene, clustering together and blocking the passage. I stepped back from the crowd, intending to see what was going on, only to spot Gregory, also trapped at the other end of the crowd, quietly looking at me. I looked away as if nothing had happened. Just as I raised my head to get a clear look at the chaos, where one of the women was screaming hysterically like a madwoman, I froze. It was Emma. Sometimes, one has to marvel at the strangeness of fate. It had once forced the three of us together through an affair, and now it made us collide again over the very same thing. Back then, not long after Emma got together with that vice president, they got married. Unfortunately, in the second year of their marriage, he cheated. For a moment, I didn't know whether to pity her for being cheated on repeatedly, or to feel a grim sense of satisfaction at the retribution she was receiving. But I hoped that in every second of her pain, she would remember that there had once been someone who was tormented just like this, because of her. Later, when the crowd dispersed and Gregory and I brushed past each other, he suddenly called my name and then said hoarsely, "I'm sorry." I stopped and looked at him. I couldn't tell what expression he wore, sadness, guilt, or an uncontrollable grief. I had no interest in figuring it out and simply said in a gentle tone, "I won't forgive you, and I hope you don't live well." He truly wasn't living well. I heard that because of the after effects of the car accident, he had been seeking treatment abroad for years, all in vain, both physically and mentally. His condition kept deteriorating. Hearing my words, he staggered slightly as Duncan called my name from afar and walked toward me. Gregory quickly turned away. For some reason, his back looked a little hunched, trembling faintly, silent and soundless. On the way home, I was too tired to talk. Holding Duncan's phone, I idly scrolled through it without any purpose. He probably thought I was unhappy after running into Gregory and being reminded of unpleasant memories. So with one hand on the steering wheel and the other gently holding mine, he apologized softly. "I'm sorry. I came late." Just then, I accidentally came across an old photo in his gallery, one taken many years ago. The person in it was me, in my junior year of college. I had once worked as an English tutor for a high school student. His parents were divorced, and he lived with his mother, who was busy with her career and rarely showed him any affection beyond matters related to school. He needed tutoring in English, but in truth, he deliberately did poorly on exams just to attract his mother's attention. So my role was less that of a tutor and more that of someone who kept him company. The last lesson happened to be his birthday. Not knowing his preferences, I chose an orange-flavored cake. He didn't eat much of it, and I thought he didn't like it. But when we parted after the lesson, he told me solemnly, "I really like it." That student was Duncan. The photo was taken when he propped his phone between the pages of a book and secretly photographed me eating the cake. In fact, the very first time I saw him at the company, I recognized him. What surprised me was that he had not only secretly taken that photo back then, but also kept it for so many years. Something trembled at the tip of my heart. I didn't know whether his "I came late" meant that he hadn't come out earlier to take me away just now, or that he hadn't found me before Gregory hurt me. But none of that mattered. I squeezed his hand back and smiled at him softly. Not late, just in time. The night breeze was cool, the moonlight gentle, my beloved by my side. Everything was just right.